A challenging climate, strange days, unprecedented times. However we choose to describe it, there is no doubt that the coronavirus has brought upheaval and disruption to global society on a level that many of us have never experienced before. While there's much talk of the pandemic being a great leveller due to its holistic impact on day-to-day life, the truth is far more complex, with individuals, businesses and organisations feeling the effects of the coronavirus in a variety of different ways. The new normal aims to give these people an opportunity to tell their stories, assess the potential impacts of the pandemic on their lives and careers, as well as exploring the challenges and opportunities that have arisen from this era-defining situation. Each week, myself, Chris Webb and Helen Armitage from the Careers and Employability Service at Sheffield Hallam University will be joined by a different guest from the world of industry, educational careers, with opportunities for listeners to put their questions forward and advance the podcast. Thanks for tuning in and joining us as we explore what the new normal means for all of us on a local, national and global scale. A very good morning and welcome to episode 9 of The New Normal. I'm joined as always by my co-host Helen Armitage. Helen, how are you doing today?
Very well today. Slightly sunburnt and covered in after sun from the glorious weather we've been having. But no, I'm good. I would say about a 7 out of 10 today. Good.
Wonderful. For a minute I thought you had cabin fever and you thought the virtual background was real and that's where
no.
So
definitely not.
Worried, but slightly relieved.
No. How are you doing, Chris? Are you okay?
I'm not too bad, yeah. I think probably about a 7 as well. I think hard to go above a 7 at the moment unless something major happens, but certainly no complaints. And we're really pleased today to be joined by kind of 2 special guests from the world of labour market information, or LMI, subject that's been getting an awful lot of coverage at the moment in sort of all sorts of social media threads, certainly within the careers profession and slightly wider now as well. So feel like it's a really perfect time to kind of launch this podcast on sort of the why of LMI and looking at things a little bit deeper. So we're joined today by 2 very special guests. First of all, Helen Janota, who's a careers and information consultant and trainer. Helen, very good morning to you.
Hello, nice to be here.
Thank you very much. And we're also joined by Charlie Ball, labour market analyst and head of higher education intelligence with Prospects. Charlie, very good morning to you.
Good morning, everyone.
So, 2 special guests, lots to crack on with. But before we do, as always, we'd like to start with our gloom busters, our good news stories for the week. So Helen A, would you like to start us off? Any good news stories you've kind of picked up on over the course of the last week?
Yeah, this is, it could be taken one of 2 ways, I think. So Gucci, the luxury and fashion label, they have announced that they're going to cut the number of fashion shows that it holds every year in an effort to reduce waste. So instead of, they're going to be moving away from the traditional spring, summer, autumn, winter cruise and pre-fall shows, which they've called stale, and moving to have less fashion shows throughout the year, which I think is brilliant, but also incredibly interesting. So this is, I mean, that kind of traditional way for the fashion sector to work and to house these fashion shows, that's been in place for a number of years, and it's built on a lot of jobs, a lot of money, and it's how the sector is run. And the fact that a very influential label has decided to change this, and other labels since then have also jumped on the bandwagon and they're talking about changing it as well, I think is absolutely incredible. It's spearheading the sector. It's going to change the way that the whole sector is run, I think, and have a massive influence on sustainability, jobs within the sector, money within the sector. It's going to be absolutely huge. And I've just been recently chatting with a number of fashion academics here at Sheffield Hallam about this, and they're really excited about how they're going to weave this into the courses that they're teaching and how they're going to spread the message to students within the coming academic year. So I think this is a really interesting time for that sector.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear. And I think I remember when I was working on the Burberry Inspire project in Leeds, hearing a little bit about some of the wastage in the fashion sector was horrifying. So
it's horrendous.
Great to hear that there are some changes afoot, certainly. Helen J, any good news stories you'd like to share with us this week?
Well, mine might appear to be quite an insignificant story, but my good news story is about a recent spotting of a hoopoe in North Nottinghamshire, which I don't know if you know, but a hoopoe is a bird with a sort of a little crest on its head. And one of the reasons that sort of it made me feel quite excited was because when I was about 8 years old, I had an RSPB poster above my bed. It had various interesting birds, and the hoopoe was one of those birds on that poster, and I always thought it looked very exotic, and I always wanted to see it. It was a pinky colour, and it was lovely. And so, yes, apparently they are in North Nottinghamshire at the moment, near Retford. So I haven't made an attempt to go up there at this point, because I imagine there's lots of people going to be there. But I just thought it was that sort of link with nature, I suppose, at the moment, how some of us have had a time to, sort of maybe reflect a bit on the world around us, taking a bit more notice of nature, and certainly birds. I know a lot of people have been talking about hearing bird song and using it as mindfulness as well, sort of focusing on, just on nature around us. So that was just that made me happy anyway.
Well, and that's all that matters with our good news story.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like a hoopoo. When I was young, I had the Osborne Spotter's Guide to Birds, which gave you ticks. You ticked off the birds, and you got a score for each one. Hoopoo was right at the very top, and I never did see one until I was an adult.
Wow. I've never seen one, so I'm very envious.
But this time last year, I was at Fuerteventura. If you remember, back in the olden days when we used to go in aeroplanes and stuff, have holidays. This time last year, I was at Fuerteventura, and the resort of Fuerteventura had loads of hoopoos, which was delightful. But they do have slightly grim personal habits sometimes. Flashing birds.
But great. I mean, as you say, Helen, as well, I think those kind of little things that people are picking up on, it does seem to be more common now. People really appreciating this, kind of smaller things that really do make you happy, which is really nice. Finally, last but not least, Charlie, hopefully not also hoopoe related, although you're welcome to do.
No, mine was also about birds, though, and it's simply the fact that the house martins are back. Now, it's always a very, very nice sign of summer that the house martins are back and building nests. And of course, I live quite close to a major road. I live quite close to the A6, and so there has been. There normally is a great deal of traffic pollution, but it's really, really abated. The noise has really abated in the last couple of months, and it's really brought the birds back in force. And similar to Helen, and as my intervention might have slightly hinted, I'm not averse to the odd bit of bird spotting every now and again, but it's a particular delight this time of year to see the swifts, the swallows, and the house martins coming back and building their nests. And it's just a really nice sign. And it seems as if there's more of them around this year. It might be confirmation bias, but it does seem like there's a lot more of them around. Of course, we also have to bear in mind that this time last year, I lived just down the road from Whaley Bridge. This time last year, the reservoir at Whaley Bridge was causing the odd problem, if people and the weather's somewhat different to how it was then. So there might also be an element of that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, if we kind of kick off then, if you could just give us a bit of an overview about COVID-19 and the impact that it's having on your life, on your work life and personal life, and what the kind of changes are that you're going through at the moment.
So on a personal note, as a kind of slightly introverted, not that it always comes across, slightly introverted data nerd, I've been practicing for lockdown all of my life. The opportunity to stay at home in my bedroom all day and not go outside has been, massively welcome to me to an extent. And joking apart, I think people there are people, you have to be mindful that for some sections of the population, those people who are not necessarily at their ease in large crowds, those people who have certain mental health issues, and people who are just plain introverted, actually lockdown has not necessarily always been a completely unpleasant experience. I do have small kids, school-age children for whom this has been very difficult. My wife has been furloughed. And we're very fortunate that obviously I'm in a job that's in significant demand. My word is in significant demand right now. And that I can work from home. And I live in quite an agreeable part of the country. But lockdown has been, it's had the same kind of stresses and effects on mental health that it has on a lot of people, and the uncertainty. And it's not been wholly negative.
Yeah. And for yourself, Helen, how's it impacting yourself?
So not quite the same as Charlie, really. I've had lots of training planned in the spring and summer months, and consultancy work as well in schools, and that would be travelling around the country. So obviously that's all been cancelled, and at first I didn't, it was like, what am I going to do now? But obviously working with LMI and in the LMI field, things have picked up a bit now. But the way it's sort of picked up is that I've had to it's a bit of a learning curve, really, I suppose, that I'm now preparing myself to do digital delivery. which I've only dabbled in a little bit before and not done a lot of. So I'm now turning my thoughts towards doing that, which I am a bit nervous about, because I am somebody who likes to read the room. I do like to, interact with people as I present, because I think it's just, it certainly helps your flow, and you can change your tacks as you go along. But in terms of working from home, I have enjoyed very much working from home for the last 4 years. So when I'm not out and about, I'm working from home on my own, and it is blissful. So now the only difference is I've got 3 other people in the house. It's not blissful at all. There is no quiet time whatsoever. So it is continuous interruptions. My children are school aged as well. My husband has been furloughed, like Charlie's partner has. So he's sort of supposed to be, looking after them, and it's difficult. I think really we have had this enormous crisis, haven't we? And we don't know how things are going to pan out for anybody in the coming months. So I'm now sort of here to sort of try and do my bit, and just get as much information out there as possible, and help support people to help those who need support, I suppose. So yes. Yeah,
that's great. That's great.
That's really interesting, because I'm mindful that I'm trying to help people through a very difficult time, whilst at the same time being one of the least affected people by this very difficult time in the country. And that tension's quite hard. I go read all the data, and for those of you who are aware of the work that I do, particularly through social media, I'm doing an awful lot of work in trying to synthesize what's going on. But for me, I'm not experiencing the worst parts of it. I'm not experiencing the kind of uncertainty that the self-employed that Helen are experiencing, or the difficulties of people in precarious employment are experiencing. And there's a sense I like to try as hard as I can to be as close as I can to the work that we do. There is also a sense that at the same time as I'm trying to navigate and trying to help people navigate, I'm slightly removed from the thick of it. And there's a tension there. That concerns me. It does bother me a little bit.
Yeah, I think we would totally agree with that. Actually, it's quite reflective of quite a lot of the guests that we've had on the podcast already. That there's been a sprinkling of kind of people who are self-employed have had to pivot quite quickly, and as Helen's mentioned, deal with some quite significant changes. But actually, quite a lot of people have been in a position where they felt maybe quite comfortable working from home, still trying to do their utmost to support, as you say, Charlie. But there is that sort of conflict, and we've got a couple of episodes coming up in a few weeks, particularly one on enterprise with some freelancers, which I think will be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of variety, and as well, I appreciate your honesty there. I think that's really good to hear. And I think as well there's an element that we're all in this together, but we're experiencing it in very different ways. And I appreciate what you said there, Helen, about how you're having to learn to use digital platforms and change your way of working, and it's new territory that yourself and others, and we're kind of learning as we go, really. So it's interesting to hear your honesty there, and I appreciate that. That's really good to know. Okay, so we'll move on to our first discussion topic, and you've kind of mentioned this. We've all kind of mentioned the importance of labour market information, and how it's kind of the hot topic at the moment. It's trending quite a lot on social media. It's everywhere, because people are looking for that magic ball that they can look through, that crystal ball that they can look through and see into the future about what it's going to look like. So, just for those people that maybe are a bit unfamiliar with the term of LMI, labour market information, or unfamiliar with working with LMI, why do you think LMI is currently the hot topic amongst career professionals, not just here in the UK, but all around the world as well?
Well, obviously people trying to make sense of what's going on. And at the moment, because we're in, and I don't like to hear I don't like to use phrases like unprecedented, because almost always things are precedented, but this really isn't. We haven't had a pandemic of this kind in the modern age, and so everybody's lives have been disrupted to a degree that was unfathomable. It's all happened so quickly. I don't even remember way back several thousand years ago in February, thinking about any of this kind of stuff, even though actually it was already clear from the news reports that something was not quite right in China. And that's a handful of short months ago. So people want a source of certainty. They want to know that there are people around. They want to know that there are people around who at least are keeping an eye on what's happening. They want to know that there are people who know stuff and that can be relied on and know what's going on. They want to know how their lives and careers are going to look. Looking now, they want to see whether their situations are exceptional or normal. And of course, there is a great great group of education leavers about to enter the jobs market. And it's important to stress, actually, for all of what we're saying about the graduate labour market and labour market, they haven't graduated yet. They're actually, at least strictly speaking, still at university. It's not for another month or so that they will actually be leaving. So there's this huge source of massive uncertainty. And at times of massive uncertainty, people want a bit of certainty. So they're coming to people in labour market information and labour market provision, just with a simple plea: what's going on? What's happening? Tell us. Help us. And so, that's where all this desire for this information is taking place. But it gives us a massive, it then puts us responsible for the Tower of Peter Parker, which of course, with great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's really interesting that, people, like you say, they're wanting some answers and they'll look for whoever they can to try and get those answers, definitely.
The most important answer we can give right now is, I don't know. It's really important to stress that there's a lot we don't know, and we shouldn't pretend to know it when we don't.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do is tell people stuff right now that isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
Can't imagine why that sprung to mind right now. But telling people things that are not true is simply the worst thing that you can be doing. If you don't know, just say, I don't know.
Definitely. Helen, would you like to come in on this question as well?
Yeah, people have lost their jobs. People are worried about losing their jobs. Young people don't know what jobs are going to be there for them when they finish educational training. And like Charlie said, we don't know the answers. So what I think we need to do is just do the best to help create that intelligence, really. I think that's the most important part. So we talk about labour market information as being statistics and data. But what we really want is the intelligence to synthesize all of that and put it into a context for people. So whereas we don't necessarily know all the answers, I think this is where the career experts come in and the labour market experts come in, is because we've got that knowledge of what went before and what maybe it's likely to look like, and we can give potential scenarios and predictions. That's part of what labour market information is, to create a sort of an idea of what the world might be like, and just to help people to make those informed decisions with what we've got at the moment. But I think Charlie's right to say that we don't know what that's going to be, but all we can do as the experts is try and create that context, put that intelligence together as and when we know it. So it's important. Something I bang on about, anyone who's seen me train before will know what I bang on about is quality of the information, high quality information, and that's what we need to be looking at right now. So some of the information that we might have used the beginning of the year, we need to be looking now at what's different, what can we draw upon now that presents the most current situation and most likely scenarios that we're moving towards to try and help people. And that's where career practitioners who have got some of that experience really need to help people to navigate that information. I think that's really important.
I think that's a really important point, particularly around that sort of idea of the quality, as you say, and kind of being critical in using that information. I actually missed out a good news story, I should say, earlier, which was about Twitter finally fact-checking Donald Trump. And it made me think exactly about that, the allowing people that opportunity to see what information has got maybe elements of validity, no validity, how can you be critical, how can you check that? And I think, Helen, you made another really good point there, which was about career experts working with that information and supporting clients with it. But actually this kind of leads on quite nicely to our next sort of question, I suppose, which is, with that sort of myriad sources of COVID-19 related information, LMI, whatever you want to call it, the acronym soup of the ISE, IES, ONS, FISSS, everything from Adzuna, Prospects, all those different sources of information that we have. You know, how can careers professionals and job seekers really navigate through that effectively? What would be your sort of tips on that side of things?
Well, I think one thing I would say is it's certainly not a one size fits all for labour market information. So, you know, you've got career professionals, like you say, and job seekers, and they'll be looking at acquiring different types of information and being able to absorb information in different ways. And therefore, the way we present that information will be different depending on that particular person. So, yeah, for a current view on the situation at the moment, there are, like you say, lots of research reports coming out from organisations such as the Resolution Foundation, got McKinsey, Sudafop, and then, like I say, the IER, ISE, and the IES. I'm not going to go into all of those acronyms, you can look them up. But the IES, has brought out an interesting report called Getting Back to Work, which is a good one to start with. So there are some excellent resources for looking at what's going on at the moment. They can be incredibly meaty, and I wouldn't necessarily, well, let's be realistic. People just don't have the time to read them all. So I think what I would suggest, certainly for career practitioners, is that maybe find 2 or 3 organisations that align with your role and your remit. So that might be official data, it might be social mobility, it might be graduate information. Follow those organisations on social media or check their websites for updates. I think that might be a good place to start. There are lots of really interesting opinion pieces around what the future of the labour market might look like. And I've been reading a lot of those just to sort of see what people are saying. I had a really interesting one actually on the correspondent news platform called "The Neoliberal Era is Ending, What Comes Next?" So it's a long read. So again, wouldn't necessarily expect everybody to have time to read it, but they sort of give you an idea of, what might happen in the future, how big, the potential is for things to change actually in the labour market. Not saying that it will change massively, but it's got the potential to. I do find Twitter particularly useful for those sound bites and nuggets of information. They just make it easier to sift through. So following people like Charlie or Tristram Hooley, who really do help to synthesize that information and get it out. I would recommend doing that kind of activity. For job seekers and career planners, I think LMI can be quite daunting anyway. And at the moment, it's going to be even more complex in its message. So I really think that, the more that career professionals can get out there and help people to mediate that information, to differentiate it as it comes to them, and then decide, what information would suit which person. I think that will really help people.
So, Charlie, you've been name-checked there. What are your thoughts? We've mentioned a lot of the sources of obviously LMI, both the information side and the intelligence side. Do you have any additional thoughts on kind of how people can navigate their way through the sort of complex sea of information?
My background is slightly different, and it's slightly atypical for a lot of people in this sector. I'm a trained physical scientist. I've got a doctorate in analytical chemistry, but I'm also a trained counsellor as well. So I come from quite an unusual viewpoint, and that kind of informs the way that I use and synthesize data. Firstly, I have to be mindful, and we have to be mindful. A lot of people in the career sector and a lot of people who are primary users of labour market information are not always comfortable users of statistical information. That's not to say they're not good at it, actually. And my experience is, in general, they tend to underestimate their ability to use and parse this data. But we have to be quite careful as deliverers of intelligence. And Helen was very careful there, I think, to distinguish between information and intelligence. And I think it's a very important distinction to make. The information is the raw data, the raw findings from surveys and so forth and reports. And the intelligence is what people like Helen, and hopefully I turn it into, so that it can be more readily used by people who haven't got the time or the inclination, or in some cases, or underestimate their skills to interpret the raw report. My inclination is always go back to primary source. So if I see a piece of reporting on, say, a report, and as Helen mentioned a very good report from the Institute of Employment Studies. So my inclination will be, I will go back and I will read the whole report. Now, I'm mindful that that's my job to do that kind of thing, and so I have the luxury of being able to do that. If that's not your luxury, but you still want to gain it, all these reports these days have well-written executive summaries right at the front. Don't read the press release if you can avoid it, and certainly don't read the newspaper article that talks about it, because the newspaper article will just be the press release generally. But read the executive summary. The press release will be what the writers think will capture the attention of journalists. The executive summary will be what the writers want the trade, if you like, the serious readers to read from the report. So read the executive summary. It'll be one page. It will have all the pertinent stuff for professionals in it. So have a look at that. At this moment, there seems to be a daunting array of data, but we have got to the point in the pandemic where a lot of it is starting to point in similar directions. So most of the reports you will read will be starting to draw broadly similar conclusions. And so I would echo exactly what Helen says. Look at your organisation or your personal context. Try to take as close a geographic context as you can. So, if you are in the north of England, try to look at data that particularly looks at the north of England, because different regional labour markets are experiencing this in different ways. If you have a particular industry focus, try to refer to organisations or reports embedded in those industries. And you will find now that if it's from a high profile and reasonably well known non-campaigning organisation, it is likely to be reliable. You've just got to be careful about organisations that have a very specific financial or political interest. That's not to say these reports are not reliable, because actually a lot of them are, and we're fortunate in a way that a lot of, for example, the politically motivated organisations in the labour market space are nevertheless reasonably objective. Not always the case, but it's the case in the labour market. It's generally the case in the labour market. You sometimes have to be a little bit careful about very specialist trade organisations, particularly right now, because we have to be mindful that the recruitment industry itself is not having a great time of it. And so I've seen over the last few weeks a couple of supposed research reports that are actually basically puff pieces for recruiters to drum up business. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have serious information in, but by and large, you can probably get that serious information from more objective sources. But I would advise people looking for this kind of information is to find reliable sources who you trust, and there are plenty of them around, and we've named quite a few of them, and follow what they're doing, and follow what they're saying. Because your thing is, you're right, we all feel as if we're all in this together, and everybody is trying to help everyone else out. Well, one interesting thing has been a real breaking down in my experience of certain professional rivalries isn't quite right, but competition. Some organisations who would ordinarily compete with one another are now working together to try for mutual help. And so, actually, I think the quality of information that we're getting at the moment is actually quite high.
Yeah, I think
I'm quite reassured by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we're seeing quite a lot, that collaborative work, that collaborative approach. We're seeing it across sectors, sectors working with different sectors. It's really interesting, right. and I think incredible to see. I mean, just Google and Apple collaborating, Aldi and Deliveroo, because Aldi don't have an online delivery service, and they've partnered up with Deliveroo, which I thought is brilliant. And unless this has happened, would that have happened? Unless we're in this current climate, would that have happened? And probably not.
Some of these partnerships and way of working will last.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for the better.
Some of them will.
Yeah, for the better.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant answers there. And you kind of spoke about it a bit there, that we are a lot further along in the lockdown now. I think week 10 maybe.
Week 10, yeah.
Week 10, yeah.
It's very difficult because every day is the same. So
exactly, yeah.
Groundhog Day. We're just looping the same day over and over. There are no weekends, there are no bank holidays. It's all just the same.
It's actually day one, yeah.
All the live long day. But we are, we're week 10. We're a lot further along in the lockdown and in this pandemic than we were in week 1. Things are changing. Things are evolving. There's a lot more data out there that people can can tap into. And like you've both said, choose your favourites and use those so it's more manageable, which I think is a brilliant tip. So thank you for that. And to kind of tap into your crystal ball as such, I mean, both professionals that are working with labour market information. Just wanted to get your thoughts on any predictions that you have regarding the economic recovery and what particular sectors might look like moving forward.
So in terms of sectors, I think there's a lot of, I think Charlie mentioned before about sort of the various ideas and influences coming together now. So I think we've all sort of probably heard in the media and in various places that how hard the hospitality, leisure and cultural sectors have been hit. And that's because we're just not participating in those activities at the moment. And there are other roles that have been severely reduced in various other sectors as well. And so some of those sectors are trying to mitigate what's going on at the moment. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've watched some of those National Theatre fundraisers. At the weekend, there was like a Folk on Foot online fundraiser festival. So those sectors, because I think they can see that long term, it's going to take a lot longer for them to bounce back. I think last week I heard someone say that up to 40% of lost jobs that have been lost already might not actually come back, which I think is quite a worrying scenario. And we just can't know which businesses will have survived well enough to start up again when things start moving. And in particular, SMEs, small to medium enterprises, have been particularly hard hit. And that will be across a whole range of sectors. So where before, sort of the end of 2019, should we say, we saw a lot of new jobs being created in the visitor economy. And those new jobs are actually in quite a lot of low-paid jobs as well. It's one of the few areas where low-paid jobs were on the increase. But we don't know how long it will take for that kind of work to return to the levels that we've seen previously. I mean, it could take several years. There's been all talk about aerospace as well, at sort of the higher skilled end, taking years, potentially 3 to 5 years to recover. I think the CEO of Rolls-Royce said last week. But what I've certainly tried to do at the beginning of this of the pandemic was we had a sort of thing with friends where we would just we look for those silver linings. Where are the silver linings? I need a silver lining. Some bit like the gloom busters at the beginning of this podcast. So I'm hoping that obviously some jobs, particularly in health and care, have been essential services and really been needed. So I'm hoping that more people, particularly young people, are going to be interested in care work because they can now see that actually understand better that it's a much more skilled job than maybe the perception was before, and realizing that actually it's also a rewarding career too. And I'm hoping that there might be some kind of overhaul in the care sector now, and we see an improvement in the future for care roles. And I'm hoping that might be the case for some other sectors as well, where we appreciate them more. But what I think we mustn't forget, I mean, there's sort of perhaps almost the elephant in the room, is the B word. What we were talking about at the end of 2019 is Brexit. That's still going to happen. So it's waiting in the wings. Let's see what's going to go on after COVID-19, but we've still got Brexit, and so that's also going to be a disruptor to jobs. And we were sort of starting to look at scenarios that might happen in certain sectors that are related to Brexit as well. I mean, there is a lot to talk about, and surely Charlie will have a lot to say on this as well. But I think we will still see a high demand for professional skills. I don't think that's going to change because, we've got obviously tech roles, digital roles. They're still going to be really in demand. And sectors that were struggling with skill shortages before, such as construction, I think, they're still going to be struggling. There's still going to be a demand for people to enter those skilled trades roles and the higher professional roles in construction as well. And actually even labourer roles, because there were still roles in construction across the occupational spectrum. So I just think it's going to be, some sectors are going to take longer to bounce back than others. I think hospitality and tourism is going to be one of them. And we shall watch this space, I suppose. It's an unknown.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Helen. That's really interesting. And it's something that I keep thinking about as well. You know, that I keep thinking about the furlough scheme and the state of the labour market when the furlough scheme ends. There's a lot of reports at the moment about, are the jobs even there now, even though, you know, people are being furloughed? It's a worry. And like we said before, we're all quite fortunate to be still in quite in demand jobs at the moment. But I think for other people that are going through quite a turbulent time at the moment, it's quite a worry. So so thank you for that. That's great. Charlie, have you got anything else to add to this?
I mean, Helen's been extremely and characteristically thorough and comprehensive there. So my observations would be I particularly for the small business sector, and Helen's absolutely right to highlight the fact that they're having a particularly tough time of it. I like to have a look at what the Chambers of Commerce is saying. They've done some very good work in this area, and to touch on some of these questions, they reckon something between 30 to 40% of employers couldn't unfurlough people right now. Sorry, I'll go back. They couldn't remove people who are currently on furlough from furlough. So, as you say, when the furlough scheme ends, we've potentially got a significant increase in employment to come. But at the same time, they also say that the large majority of businesses could get back to reasonably normal operations very rapidly if lockdowns and restrictions are eased. So we do have to be mindful of that. Looking at the graduate labour market, because that's my speciality, clearly the sector that's been affected the most is the arts, and I'm concerned about the situation in the arts sector. It's an important employer. It has a lot of self-employment and freelance work in it, as well as issues with the simply monetising, how you actually pay people when they can't physically go to or physically experience or perform. Plus, we have all the issues with financial issues of the traditional media as well. The other side of the coin is that sector is extraordinarily innovative and generally a lot more resilient than we give it credit for. And I think to an extent we'll also be looking to the arts and the self-employed for answers and for a way forward, and for a pointer of how the rest of us are also going to experience the future of work post-pandemic. In terms of sectors, graduate sectors that may find things a little easier, I mean, it's clear the health and social care sector is unlikely to experience the same kind of tribulations as many of the other sectors. The government had started, one of the things that interests me, I was peripherally involved in, just before lockdown started, we'd launched quite a large programme to recruit allied health professionals. So we're talking here not about doctors and nurses, we're talking about physiotherapists and the occupational therapists and the radiographers and the midwives, who had, we'd seen a significant reduction in positions over the last decade. Absolute backbone of health provision, and crucially important right now because a lot of people who've been ill and recovered from COVID-19 nevertheless require quite a lot of rehabilitation, and they need occupational therapy. A lot of these crucial health professionals who are not quite so high profile, and they're all in shortage. All of them are in shortage. Well, we went into the pandemic with all of them in shortage, partly because the profile of some of these professions wasn't very high, partly because it's difficult to get training in them. And I'm optimistic that this will unlock a lot of demand for people in some of these more these less, well, I was going to say less traditional. A lot of them are very traditional professions. You can hardly call midwifery a non-traditional profession. Depending on your point of view, it's probably the oldest profession. But sort of less high profile and hugely important professions in health and in social care. It's also clear that a lot of the professional services sector has been inconvenienced by the pandemic, as people have had to work at home a lot more than they would. And that's about the size of it. And when lockdown eases, a lot of the professional services sector will come back pretty strongly. And that's where an awful lot of graduates work. And it's difficult at the moment to perceive exactly how and where the jobs will come back, and if there will be further recruitment. And a lot will depend on when lockdown is eased and whether we have a second wave of virus that requires it to be reimposed. And I think that's Helen's absolutely right to have mentioned Brexit. The crunch point at the end of June will be will have an extremely significant bearing on business confidence, and particularly will have a bearing on business confidence if business confidence is already low. And so I'm reluctant to talk very, very strongly about the shape of our UK recovery when we have a situation that is likely to have a very significant bearing on the nature and timing of that recovery, still ongoing. And people have kind of forgotten about it, put into the background, but it is extremely significant. It's extremely significant for most sectors of the UK economy. And no agreement is reached with the European Union by the end of June, and no extension is agreed, as both those situations look to be the situations you would now expect to happen. Then that will seriously impair the ability and the willingness of businesses to invest in the way that we would need them to do, push a good quality economic and labour market recovery through the second half of the year. And the best we can hope for in those circumstances is that we might see it next year. But then we're also assuming no government action, because that's the other thing. The government has a great many levers that it can pull to increase demand, and my gut is that it will need to do that. And so I'm being quite mindful of how I'm being quite careful and measured about the way that we look at which sectors recover. Construction and manufacturing are also very interesting to me in this area. They're often overlooked. I mean, Helen was right to highlight construction as an important sector. Different subsectors of construction and manufacturing are experiencing pandemic differently. So even now we have to be quite careful between, for example, in manufacturing, aircraft manufacturing and pharmaceuticals manufacturing, who for obvious reasons are having a very, very different experience. In construction, infrastructure construction, work on roads and railways has not been desperately impaired. In fact, for example, engineering work on the railways has not been particularly impaired by the fact that there's not much rail running. And I'll state the obvious as well. Business has been very pleasantly surprised by and large by how effective virtual working has been for many routine functions. Not all. I have spoken to businesses who've said, Zoom meetings work really well, but they have absolutely convinced us that we need a physical space. We can do Zoom meetings and we can work through Zoom meetings, but everybody wants to get back into an office, and we think we work better like that. And it's really cemented the fact that we need an office. Whereas other businesses have said, well, it turns out we do a shed load of routine meetings that waste a load of time with people travelling. They need to happen, but we can have them all by Zoom now, and we don't need people travelling for a day to our Birmingham office to have an important project management meeting when they can just do an hour from Bristol. And that will have a significant effect on many professional businesses in particular. But in terms of, and the other point that Helen made, that the hospitality and entertainment business has been heavily affected, also actually has a profound impact on higher education, because although in general actually not many graduates go into those jobs, quite a few do but not many, they're hugely important to students paying their way through university. And a structural change in that sector throws into doubt or throws into turmoil our whole model of student funding and support. If students can't work in bars and cafes during the week, a lot of them can't go to university.
I think it's a really fair point, and I think both of your responses have really just, I suppose, crystallised for anybody listening, and certainly for ourselves, just how complex the picture is. I'm amazed at the moment how many people I speak to who weren't aware of the 30th of June deadline for the Brexit negotiations.
Well, they will be on the 1st of July.
And, well, that's it. Yeah, exactly. And I think, as you say, it's such a complex picture, both when we look at the graduate side of things and some of those unintended consequences you mentioned about student jobs, but also, of course, through to the apprenticeship market and the dip in vacancies we've seen there. And of course, anyone else affected from kind of school leaver through to mid-career changer, and all sorts of different individuals affected in different ways, and differently, I suppose, affected by what labour market information is out there and how they can use it. So some really, really important reflections there. So some really, really interesting reflections there today. I think one thing just to mention, first of all, we've talked a lot about acronym soup, and we've talked a lot about data reports, all these type of things, and intelligence reports, as Helen rightly mentioned. All of those resources that we've talked about today will include in the episode notes. So you can have a look through those in your own time. And as Charlie mentioned, read the executive summary, even if you don't have time to read the full reports. But I guess finally, just to sort of conclude things, we like to kind of bookend the podcast with our gloombusters at the start and a bit of good news or food for thought. So just starting with yourself, Helen, are there any kind of real tips or top takeaways, I guess, for anyone listening to this podcast from kind of career professional through to job seeker in terms of LMI and I guess kind of leveraging the use of it during the current period?
Well, I think really just that the careers advisors, career professionals are key with this, and that's what I'd like to see moving forwards. Is more the government, I suppose, giving more support to career guidance and the importance of it, particularly for young people, but for everybody really. And just thinking, I suppose, about who are some of the main career influencers on our career decisions, and certainly again for young people, it's family and friends. For people already in work, it might be colleagues. And so LMI, they may pick up on bits of LMI from the media, and like Charlie was saying, we do need to be careful about spin sometimes. And again, just that the importance of the career advisor as expert, or the labour market information specialist as expert, because I think from this discussion we've realised that it's a lot more nuanced than we might think. We may hear all these broad statements, but actually it is a lot more nuanced. And so to draw on that experience, I think one thing we haven't talked about, and perhaps I'm starting something at the end, is just to talk about real-time vacancy data as well, and how that can be really helpful for looking at the very current picture at the moment. What exactly is going on? Where are the jobs right now, right at the moment, rather than looking forwards, what's going on right now? And there is a particular jobs board called Adzuna, which is really good for that actually presents information in really quite a clear, understandable way, that I would say that if any career practitioners are listening that want to gain an understanding of what the current picture is looking like, and in a way that they can use that information with anyone that they might be talking to who's planning their career. There are some caveats. It is only online vacancies, so it's not all vacancies. So it's not perfect, but it does give a bit of an idea, and also it provides that local picture. It drills down really locally, and it visualises some of that information as well. So thinking about the way people absorb information, some people like to read it, some people prefer a visual representation. And there's also a blog explaining some of this as well. So I think I didn't mention that before, but I think I was going to mention it at this point. It's just a useful tool to have, and just think, career practitioners, expert, and we need them now. They are vital.
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. And to use that Brexit analogy from way back when, we obviously haven't had enough of experts, from what you're saying. So that's definitely no. And the Adzuna blog would totally agree. Really, really useful. Charlie, final word on this. Any kind of additional top tips, perhaps, that we've not covered?
Yeah, if you're a job seeker, particularly a graduate job seeker, do bear in mind that although things are very difficult, they're also changing rapidly. And just because things are really tough now doesn't mean they'll necessarily be as tough in 5-6 months' time. There are a whole profession full of really capable, really bright people who are desperate to help you. So do access as much of that help as you can, and they will be delighted to try and help you. And they've learned a lot from previous years. The careers sector is as good and skilled as it has ever been. And there's an awful lot of really, really able, really dedicated, really committed people in it. So make use of that resource while you can. And fundamentally, if you're leaving university this year, things will be difficult, but the likelihood is that in time you will make a decent career for yourself. It might not be exactly the one you thought it would be when you left university, but then that often happens. The likelihood is that in the long term, you will make a decent career, and just to try and make that process and transition to that career as smooth and as unstressful for you as we can make it. that's what we're here to do.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Charlie. And it's amazing, actually, on previous podcasts, we've had how many guests who graduated in, I think we've had, Helen, recessions from the 80s all the way up to current recession.
Yeah. I graduated in 1991, which is the second worst year to graduate on record. And I got a master's degree in 1992, which is the worst year on record to have got a master's degree. And that's why I do to try and help people in situations that I was in.
And I think, we've had such similar reflections from other guests who've graduated in the recessions in the 80s, the dot-com bubble. Helen and I graduated in 08, 09. So, we've got this real gamut. And again, I think the reflections have been exactly the same.
Worst year for a UK graduate to graduate, for the record, was 1983.
And we've got actually a podcast coming out soon with the Vice Chancellor from Sheffield Hallam University, where he talks exactly about that year. So
brilliant.
He graduated in that year, yeah. I think something to pick up on there, Charlie, what you said is that there's a whole army of people here that are willing and able to help graduating students this year. Every university has a graduate career service there, whether it's 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, or a lifetime. So I think the key takeaway is for students and graduates to latch on to that.
They're better equipped and more accessible than they've ever been.
Absolutely.
So
that's a brilliant tip.
Do use them. Yeah. Do use them. There is no reason not to. They want you to talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Likewise, if we have apprentices, or we have school leavers, or we have kind of college students listening to this as well, again, although some really good points from Helen about the funding of kind of careers advice and guidance in relation to that, and that is something I think definitely for another topic. Really, really valuable.
You're Christian for that.
Having said that, actually, some excellent points there, and the teams that we do have in schools and colleges doing some excellent work as well. So whoever's listening to this, whatever stage you're at in your career, do reach out if you're interested in more about labour market information, intelligence. Check out the resources, the links on our episode notes. Do listen back to this again, because we've had some great reflections here, and do get in touch with those support teams around you who can help you digest and kind of pick apart this type of information. But we have to say thank you again to both Charlie and Helen for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and to those listening at home, have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having me.
If you've been interested in anything that we've talked about on today's podcast, do get in touch with us via the comment threads on the podcast link, wherever you're listening. We'll be tuning in again next week with a guest soon to be announced. And each week when we announce the guest, we'll be giving you a chance to put questions to the special guest in advance of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in and listening to us here on The New Normal.